Welcome everybody to the latest Seasons on Saturday. This is our chapter 8 story of the Four Seasons recording career, and it's informed by the research I did with Bob Fisher for the late Bob Fisher for Snap and Music collection, which is coming out this year. So today we have a great full team with us. Well, we will have, hopefully. We have Anthony Colatrella, we have Dominic Paradise, we have Mike Derrico, Chuck Walker, and we hope to have Lee Shapiro sometime in the near future. So this session, carrying on from where we were last time, is all about the Four Seasons as they move from Philips to Motown. And it's a period which is and was for a long time little known, and many of us missed it. In fact, from the correspondence that I've had from you guys, I think virtually all of us missed it, apart from an odd moment in maybe 1973. But it still, we found out a lot in the last few years, and in particular we found out in an interview that was salvaged last year that when they were leaving Philips, they were looking around for a new label. They needed a new label because obviously it was the end of the road with Philips, as we discussed last time. But there were feelers put out, and it is now known that you and Abner picked up a phone call, heard that Frankie was looking for a new label. He made a phone call to Berry Gordy, and then things started to move forward. The deal was done, but the Four Seasons were leaving for the UK. And on the 4th of October, when they returned to the US, the news broke that they'd signed to Berry Gordy's label. So the first thing is going first of all to you, Anthony, as somebody who was in New Jersey and following everything Four Seasons. Did you get to hear about it, or did you understand why?
Yes, I was in Philadelphia in medical school at the time, 69 to 73, and I went to a Four Season concert in Philadelphia in late 71. And it was also the first time I had seen Dimitri Callis perform with the Seasons. And at that concert, Frankie announced that they had just signed with Motown. Of course, there's big applause. And I said, wow, that's great. Now we might be able to get some hit songs after, this long pause that there had been at the end of Philips.
But what month do you remember what month and what part of the year that would be? After October, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was late it was either, I'm sure it was late 71. Yeah, because he said they introduced Dimitri Callis as a new member, and then, as I recall, it was at the end of the concert, or just about at the end, he announced they had also signed with Motown. So I'm very expectant, waiting great things to happen, but nothing happened. I never heard, time went by, you never heard anything more. No records came out. I finally, I used to go to the Sam Goody, was the local radio store in Philadelphia. I would go to the record store and look in the racks, and finally I came across this album, Chameleon, just this gray chameleon on the thing, Four Seasons. I looked at the back, saw these songs, I had never heard any of them. Brought it home, played it, thought it was great, but I'd never heard these songs either before or afterward. You say, we didn't know about them being at Motown. Well, I heard they went to Motown, but that was the last I heard. It was almost impossible, really, not to not know they were with Motown.
Well, we do know that when they signed to Motown, we know that from the interview we heard that Bob Gordy had said they were contracted to do 8 tracks with Motown's in-house producers and 12 tracks as a self-contained group. And so obviously we now can see that was the structure of things. But the only news that we we did get in the UK was a newsletter from Motown in January 1972. And that showed that 15 tracks had been laid down, and there was going to be a new album constructed from that. The strange thing about that is several of those tracks still remain unreleased at this point in time. But it's clear from the research that we've been able to do that they started recording straight away in October upon their return from the UK. And it looks as though Frankie Valli was the main act that was recording. They did a track called My Heart Cries Out to You, which is still
a great song.
Yeah, and we know now it's a great song, and it should have been the next single. And Stuart Bailey, who was the president at the time, got into the sessions late in that year and heard them actually laying down those tracks with Marcelino and Larson, who were the producers that they were working with at the time. But that's all we know, and that's all we knew until somewhere on the internet it says that there were no singles from the album Chameleon, and Chameleon was issued in May. Just throw this into the ring for you guys, and come on to the rest of you. There were three reasons why they signed for Motown, as I see it. One is they needed the money, so they would have got a contract and an upfront payment. Two is Berry Gordy needed them because he was moving his operations from Detroit to California, and he had designed this so-called West Coast soul sound, and he needed a big artist that was at least known, because the rest of the artists at the label MoWest were very much newcomers and little known. Sarita was known, Blinky was known, but only in a minor way, and the other people like Odyssey and the Crusaders were not known at all. So, you know, the label only issued 40 singles and maybe 10 albums in its whole operation, which was a little over 18 months. So does anybody else, Dominic, you wouldn't know much about that, being a bit younger than the rest of us. You'd have been catching all this in retrospect, I would imagine.
Yeah. At that time, I was 12 years old in 72.
So when did you first hear anything from the Motown period?
When I was younger, my brother and sister, they're both older than me, and we had records around. We had Cousin Brucey on the radio on the weekends. So I was familiar with it. I would buy the Columbia records, have them delivered, and that's how we listened to the music back then. You would have to order them, you know, over the phone, over the TV commercial, and that's how I got involved. Well,
two people who probably know the Chameleon album pretty well as younger people are Mike Derrico and my son Mark. So Mike, you first heard Chameleon probably when your dad played it.
Yeah, this is the first record that, and excuse my voice because this is actually the second episode in a row that I'm sick again, so I'm dealing with a little head cold here. But this is the first record that I actually remember in real time, and I mean, 1972, I'm 2. So, I mean, I don't remember anything exactly in 72, but some of my earliest memories of my entire life have to deal with this album. So, at the point that we moved to where we ultimately lived for like my entire childhood in Fords, my parents had moved a few times. So his old Phillips records were kind of became my toys at that point because they'd been through the mill. So I would like literally play with Four Seasons records. Everything had the Phillips label. Until one day when this appeared in my house, and this was like, I saw this. I was like so attracted by the color.
What a label! What a
MoWest label.
Yeah.
it was like candy to me. Like I wanted to eat it. My dad was like, no, you can't. And then so but this was, it was known in my house that this record was different. That there was something, like my dad would, kind of just like, would say it over and over again, that this is different. I think new Four Seasons was actually used in my house before we realized that there were new Four Seasons. I had no idea their names yet. I was like 4 years old. It was shortly before I saw them live for the first time. I saw them in 1974. I do have memories of it. But I remember specifically always wanting to play this record. I would jump up and down and ask my dad to put this one on, only because it had this label on it. I was just, again, color off the MoWest label.
It's an iconic West Coast label.
And what always stuck with me was the beginning of A New Beginning.
Yeah.
And for years later on, I guess he lost all of his vinyl over the years. And then at some point in my 20s, during the 1990s, I used to wonder about this rare, obscure Four Seasons record. And it took me a few years to find it. I came across it at the House of Rare Records on Carmine Street in the Village. Got a copy for $30, which I thought was a lot at the time. Now you're lucky if you get any old vinyl for $30 in good condition, So, and then shortly after I found it, they finally came out with those 2008 reissues on CD, where they kind of released all that Motown stuff. So
yeah, well, I mean, it was Bob Gaudio moving into his experimental mode again, and it would be the platform for him being the producer that eventually hit gold with the Who Loves You album. And as I mentioned, the Who Loves You album, I just want to say welcome to Lee Shapiro, who's just joined us. The whole crux of this episode is it takes us to the first point in the platform to the new Four Seasons as we regard them. But Bob Gaudio was lucky with this album because he had a good starter in A New Beginning, because as we know from last time, this was written with Bob Crew in 1970, and it had hung around with him whilst Bob Crew was in recovery from the bankruptcy and the drug and alcohol problems he had. But Bob Gaudio wrote two of the songs himself. He wrote two with Al Ruzicka, and that was the Flavor group that included Al Ruzicka and Dimitri Callis. Well, the other, well, there was actually 5 seasons at the time because Clay Jordan was with them. And with Joe Long, that made 5 seasons. But this is where I think the Four Seasons first made a move to being a good live band as well as a studio band. That wouldn't really come to full fruition until the new guys came in from 73 onwards. And that's the point we're moving towards with this. And Bob Gaudio also wrote 2 songs with Britt Gaudio, is his wife, who'd reconciled with him after a breakup a few years before. And 2 of the songs are real classics. It's also interesting to know that Bob Gaudio had signed as a producer at the time of the signing up for Motown. And he and Britt would write songs for Diana Ross, and Bob Gaudio would get to produce those. But that's going to be later. Okay, Anthony, so over to you and your thoughts on Chameleon generally.
Well, first of all, I thought that Motown completely kind of mismanaged the Four Seasons in that album. As we know, the Seasons were always regarded as a strong singles group, yet what did they do? What did Motown do? The very first record they released from the album is a Frankie Valli solo, when they should have really been trying to establish the Seasons as a group with a new sound, which Chameleon was. It was a new sound. And they should have looked for a strong single, which I think from that album, in my opinion, it was The Night.
And instead of releasing The Night, they went to a song that wasn't even on the album. That made no sense at all. Walk On, Don't Look Back.
Well, before that, they issued Love Isn't Here, like it
Yeah,
used to.
just that was the Frankie Valli. They released it as a Frankie Valli solo, not as a Four Seasons song.
Yeah,
I think that was a mistake.
but don't you think there was a dichotomy or a clash in the way they signed with the two sets that they were doing? You know, with other producers that were part of the MoWest ensemble,
Oh
and
yeah,
then also with Gaudio. So they were recording these at the same time in October, November,
yes.
December, January.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I just think their strategy should have been from the onset to try to establish the Four Seasons as having a new sound. And I thought releasing a Four Seasons song with The Night as compared to a Frankie Valli solo, Love Isn't Here, would have been the way to go. And then when they did release a Four Seasons song, it was a song that wasn't even on the album. That made no sense at all. Walk On, Don't Look Back, which was ironic because that's exactly what it was. It was a look back. Yeah. It was not even written by Gaudio. It was written by the Motown corporation, their own in-house writing and arranging team. It was a clear-cut recycling of Ragdoll. You know, it was just a throwback to the 60s season sound, which is exactly what Gaudio did not want to do when he signed on with Motown. So it was kind of like a slap in the face almost to Gaudio.
But perhaps Gaudio didn't also want any of the other productions, which are quality productions by quality producers, being released to compete with what he saw as and wanted as his breakthrough album at Motown,
right?
In Chameleon. So he suppressed the other stuff, and it stayed suppressed in a large part until Inside You came out and they'd left the label.
I was gonna say, it seems like there was a clear-cut disconnect between Motown and Gaudio, and didn't they sit down and discuss their plans, what their visions were?
One of the things we haven't discussed in these sessions, and we will do a general one on it, is Frankie just went into the studio and just sang his head off. You know, all of the performances that I've heard that he did with other producers have been total quality. You know, the 13 unreleased, the Inside You album, all those tracks that were around at Chameleon time. But with Chameleon, don't you think it was quite an eclectic mix of songwriters and songs that makes it stand out as an album?
Chameleon?
Yeah, because you've got 5 different.
No, on Chameleon you have Gaudio and Rizika, Gaudio and his wife, and Gaudio and crew with New Beginning, right?
Yeah.
So, and 2 just were written by supposedly by just Gaudio himself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but the mixture is, I think this is why I think it's fundamentally different and better than Genuine Imitation Live Cassette. That's my personal view. Whereas Genuine Imitation Live Cassette used a single lyricist and was really stemming from the underground movement. The orchestrations were group, and they weren't heavy orchestrations or they weren't rock. Whereas Chameleon's got elements of the rock sound in Some Country and Touch the Rain Child and The Night, along with the sadder ballads like Poor Fool and Love Isn't Here. And as a result, it seems to work better in. Gaudio described it as a mix of colors.
Oh yeah, changing colors.
Changing colors, and obviously that's how I see and hear the songs.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think it was a new sound. It was clearly not the '60s season. There was no doo-wop. There was no falsetto. There wasn't the march clap beat. and it clearly was not genuine imitation Life Gazette with the sort of semi psychedelic lyrics and heavy orchestration. It
Yeah.
was more. It was more of a rhythmic.
Yeah. Pop
Sort
rock.
of rock,
Pop
yeah,
rock.
pop rock, and even a sort of jazz number,
Influence, yeah.
jazz influence in there.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a very nice blend. I thought it struck a really nice middle ground and establishing a new sound. It just Motown, I think, just failed to promote it as such.
Yeah, and it's such a shame that it took till 2008 for anybody to release it formally on CD. That just is criminal.
And then I think Motown sort of compounded their problem, because after the initial year or so, when MoWest failed and the Seasons went back to Motown, they only released what, 4 other singles from 72 through 74. And the singles they released, when you now compare them to all these unreleased tracks, it leaves a lot to be desired. There were so many great tracks that they just ignored. I just don't understand it.
Well, there's still more there as well, because we know with the other producers that they did, like Wigs and Lashes, and obviously Bob Crewe came and did such great stuff.
Right.
Because we've now got Star, which is coming out, which is a fantastic song and arrangement. We've also had With My Eyes Wide Open.
Eyes Wide Open. Yeah.
And
Inside You.
And Inside, I mean, listened to yesterday. All great material.
Yeah, there supposedly was to be another album in 74, which I guess Motown
73 August.
73.
It was How Come was going to be the one, and Inside You were going to be key tracks.
Inside You, Eyes Wide Open.
According to the artist cards, that was the case. But then it was cancelled. And then belatedly we get the Hickory sessions. But the Crewe period should have been the Motown 10 and a new sound, but it didn't happen.
When I saw that album Inside You come out after the Seasons had left Motown and were on to the Who Loves You, and Motown was obviously trying to take advantage of the newfound success, which they should have had at Motown. I looked at those songs and played them, and I said, well, why didn't they release any of these songs? Inside You, Eyes Wide Open, really good songs.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Okay.
It's really a crime.
Yeah. Okay, well, turning to you, Chuck, what are your thoughts, re what we've been saying about Chameleon, Motown?
Well, Ken, I have a totally different perspective in 2023 than I had when the album came out.
Give us your West Coast perspective there, Chuck.
Yeah, very different. Ken, you've noted that one of the big changes Motown was trying to do was to take advantage of a market which was big on the West Coast and the way West Coast music was coming across. Yeah. There were all sorts of singles coming out on the West Coast. Different producers, independent producers who would try to imitate the Phil Spectors or the Bob Crews, would put these groups together, and they had the same players or singers, but they'd come up with a different name every week, and some of them hit and some of them missed. And I think that some of the things that probably Gaudio was trying to do was understand what was taking place out west and trying to get into that more mellow sound that was coming out of some of the West Coast at the time, getting away from the doo-wop beat of the Seasons or the car surf sound on the West Coast of the heavy guitar, and getting into a more balanced play. One of the things I noticed in re-listening to Chameleon was that my favorite on the Chameleon is New Beginning, the long version.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed that song and the lyrics. But as I've re-listened to the album, there is a clear differentiation between the Gaudio Crew related production. The arrangers were different.
Yeah.
And they sound different. The other thing I noticed that I picked up, and it may just be my ears, that a couple of the songs on the album seem to have the same instrumentation as My Eyes Adored You, the same similar sound. I don't know if you guys picked that up.
Yeah. I wouldn't be
And I
Clever.
don't recall which ones those are. I'd have to re-listen to it again. But there was a kind of a relationship between there. So now I understand how My Eyes Adored You fit into those sessions at Motown. The other thing that the Four Seasons up to that point, they had a standard sound. They had a stable group, and you had the Valli falsetto, you had the instrumentation, and you had the guys backing him. I think some of the Motown stuff used a lot of session singers, and it kind of diluted the sound that we saw with the standard Four Season mixes. And clearly, I think that the group missed Bob Crew's input on some of the stuff, and if he would have been there to help them instead of doing other things, that may have increased the success. And the other thing, the promotion was horrible. I agree with Tony. There was just lack of.
There was none.
There was none. Yeah. Well, yeah. The one of the things that struck me that in doing this analysis and doing the history that we've been saying, there's one thing that struck me when I was just looking at the albums that came out, is that between 1968 and 1974, I think the Beach Boys put out about 8 albums, 2, 4, 6. I'm counting 8. I'm counting at least 8 albums, non-original albums. You know, from Smiley, from Smiley Smile, Wild Pony, Surf's Up, and you know the Seasons. You know, Bob Gaudio had killed the Four Seasons sound with the death of Jenny Imitation Life, because Phillips didn't believe in them. They weren't a stable record company, and they just weren't getting believed in as a group. They were an oldies group, as we said in the previous sessions when we looked at the unreleased. So the expectation was Motown would put out, and probably contracted to put out, more than one album a year, but failed to fulfill that. Although Gaudio still believed in them in mid-72. And he didn't want, he was sick of Four Seasons hits. He said in a quotation, an interview with Stuart Miller. So what do you think? What do you think of that?
Clearly, he was trying to move to a different direction. Two parts of the direction. One is to replace the old doo-wop season sound with a sound which was more consistent with what the buying public was interested in the early 70s, but also to continue the efforts to highlight Frankie Valli as a solo artist. Yeah. And I think those are two different things he was working on. And his songs were great. It's just that the public was more interested in songs by the Byrds, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and
he didn't
Eagles on the West Coast.
He didn't manage to get Motown to give him much other work other than the Diana Ross work and a little bit of stuff with Michael Jackson. And the Martin and Finley album that he did is an absolutely dreadful piece of work. It's just, and there's Beach Boys playing on it. Remember?
Yeah, well, everybody in those days was playing on everybody's albums.
Yeah,
they were all acting as a studio musician in the background just to keep their income coming in.
Okay. Well, before we leave the Chameleon and MoWest time, if Mike's there, have you got any comments on this to just finish off the MoWest period?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you guys said, because we can't stress enough the lack of promotion with especially Motown during this period. What we often hear with regard to the promotion or lack of promotion with Chameleon, we always hear the same thing about Berry Gordy being too busy with Diana Ross and Lady Sings the Blues and that whole project. I don't buy that. I don't. There's no excuse for the lack of promotion and the lack of focus and highlight that the Chameleon album deserved.
Well, Dave Pell was an executive at Motown, and in the 2010 article, and I've quoted in the book, he says that he wasn't allowed to do the things he wanted to do because Gordy was interfering.
Yeah, kept interfering.
But another thing I want to say is, we hear about the night a lot, and we all love the night. I don't know if we all love the night, but I love the night.
Yeah.
And I love that in recent years, it's finally gotten some attention, that, more people are hearing it. Frankie put it into the set list.
Yeah.
But I've probably said more than once, I've mentioned Touch the Rain Child more than once on this podcast. And I think it's equally as great. It's one of those driving beats. It's catchy. The vocals are strong. I personally think it's probably possibly Frankie's strongest vocal. It's another one that there's nothing radically different on this album from what was on the pop charts in 1972.
No.
I think either The Night or Touch the Rain Child were painfully, criminally ignored on this record. I mean, it's got hit written all over it. Frankie's voice is the power.
Even Some Country was worthy of a rock release, and could have done.
Yeah. And I mean, there's electric guitar on it. Frankie's belting out the vocal. I mean, I don't think Frankie's voice peaked in the 60s. I think Frankie's voice peaked in the mid 70s and albums like this. And do we know, is that Dimitri on guitar on Love Isn't Here?
Well, no, I don't think it is. I think it was all session. I think it was all session people.
Because I wasn't quite sure of who exactly played on the album. But as far as the sounds that we hear on the record, it's some of it. I mean, Poor Fool is kind of a precursor to the music we hear Frankie do on the Private Stock label.
Yeah, it is.
You have touches of that, I'd Rather Leave While I'm in Love song by Rita Coolidge. A lot of people made that song, like Frankie later sang it. But it has that Private Stock feel to it.
Well, much of the unreleased has got classic sounds that echo across to Private Stock, like Future Years. Which is almost a precursor to Look at the World, It's Changing. A lot of
these songs are connected. A lot of songs.
And of course they did record with you.
Right.
Whilst they were at Motown, it hasn't surfaced, but it's listed in the tape list, and it could only be the Carol Bayer Sager song that they eventually did a Private Stock. So I see this period now as really being the fundamental growth period for what comes next, and what came next in terms of the split of the two careers. Most of us, including myself and Mark, absolutely love. It's my favorite but one Four Seasons album, because it ranks probably alongside, for me, Who Loves You. Okay, Mark. So turning to you, you've heard the Chameleon album because I bought you a vinyl copy a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm struck by something that Mike Derico said in a podcast interview he did with one of the guys from Badfinger, that, when your music from around the time you were born, for certain kinds of people, can have a really powerful impact. And I mean, it was last Friday, it was my birthday. And it's like the amazing thing, as life moves on, it's my 52nd year, and my mum, 52nd birthday, my mum was telling me amazing stories when I was chatting to you guys about the night I was born in Liverpool Maternity Hospital. The windows were open, and she could hear there was music playing from a club nearby, and there's something about music from that time that has just kind of is in my bones. I feel the same way about George Harrison's All Things Must Pass album, and quite a lot of the Elton John song, a lot of the Elton John work from that early 70s, 1971-ish, and Badfinger as well. But like, the funny thing with Chameleon is it didn't really have an impact on me until years later. And you got me a copy of that, like in, I think, the mid 2010s. And I was, going through, accepting that I was in a relationship that was dying at that point, and really it helped me to come to terms with something in that. And there was a sense of renewal in it, and a new beginning. I know, For me, that was a really, it really helped me along. And
I mean, there's other tracks like "Love Isn't Here Like It Used to Be."
oh yeah,
you know,
yeah.
"When the Morning Comes," which is a real relationship song.
Yeah.
"Poor Fool," about the naivety of.
Yeah, you know, and the poor fool is something that you can really easily see in your relationship. Well, you know, in a dynamic with somebody else that doesn't get it, you know, and
Well, you're a song that I can't sing, you know.
absolutely. So yeah, for me, it's an extraordinary album, but it doesn't. And you know, I always think it's really interesting that you've chosen to very strongly associate yourself, your identity in terms of as a researcher, with that album, with your, you know, your handle and everything.
Well, it is my favorite album,
Yeah,
really.
but right, yeah. But as a child, growing up, I don't associate that music. I didn't hear at the time. What I did hear as a kid was the Who Loves You album, and you know, songs like Silver Star are absolutely, they take me right back to being a kid, because you were always playing that album in the mid-70s, you know, and that album, there's something about that album that's really got a different energy.
Well, that's what I'm going to come to. That's what I'm going to come to, is the new energy of the new Four Seasons that stems from Who Loves You, and we'll pick that up in the next
and in a way, that's what relationship, you know, and Chameleon was always that transformation, that pain of that. And we, you know, those of us who've been through really fundamental relationship changes, Chameleon represents that. But Who Loves You is about the hope on the other side, you know.
Well, Lee knows all about that.
Chasing on for the Silver Star.
Lee will tell us all about that and more as we go on. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thanks.
Can I comment?
Yeah, come on in, Chuck.
You know, I had trouble with the album when it came out, because my mental model was the old doo-wop Four Seasons that I remember. You had the driving beat and the falsetto of Valli. Looking back at Chameleon, it's an interesting album from new beginnings, and as it flows through, it's more of an album which has got a combination of the older sound moving into a jazz type beat, and some of the different types of sounds which were popular around the country at that point in time, kind of a metamorphosis of the group into a new movement. And I think one of the problems that they did not address well at that time was that most of the program directors and probably the merchandising people that put these albums out to the public were not attuned to some of the changes and how to deal with taking an older group like the Four Seasons, who had a history of successes, with this new sound and getting it out to the public. And that's why many of us probably did not hear a lot of the album, because it was not merchandised well. And I think the merchandising is a critical factor in the fact that it was not a successful move.
Well, we've heard from Anthony and yourself that was hardly ever played on radio, and I think by this time the radio play model had changed somewhat, and the promotion guys really needed to have a way of getting it out there to people, and that clearly wasn't happening at MoWest in 1972. And he wanted to promote his own producers, and he was a member of the corporation, which was a group of 4 or 5 producers, and they came up with Walk On, Don't Look Back. Now, Bob Gaudio rejects that sound altogether.
Yes.
Didn't want to go back to the 60s sound. He said in an interview with Stuart Miller that who wants, you know, after 42 classic hits, who wants to be doing the same old stuff? Which is ironic, because Lee, coming to you, you know, that's always been Frankie's basis for doing his live shows, hasn't it?
Because he was trying. I could hear him trying to break out as a producer. And if you don't do that, that's okay too. You make hit records, you make the same records. And Gaudio used to say 2 things to me. One, if they like it the first time, they'll love it the second time. It was the first time I heard that.
Yeah.
The second is if you want to write a hit record, start with one, which means he was somewhat plagiaristic.
Well, he
So
mentioned the Beatles while he was at Motown, and he
he's
said
chasing.
and he said Motown need to diversify like the Beatles did.
Yes, and he was wrong, because the Beatles had established themselves in so many ways, not just songs that were songs, but songs that were comments on the culture, and not just using hippie language for the sake of it rhyming. I mean, it's a different
type of creativity. Yeah.
The Beatles, to me, you can't even say Elvis and the Beatles in the same sentence, whereas most people would say, sure, two big rock icons. Completely, totally no comparisons on any level, and both fabulous for what they accomplished. But Gaudio was basically becoming a follower, which wasn't his thing, because his own creativity and need to do things all himself, and ego, and I actually wrote with Brief Gaudio also, so I can address that. But be that as it may, it was starting to, when something doesn't work and you see someone else's project working and you know how to do that, it's really tough not to do it. If anyone in the world would have signed the Four Seasons in '72 or whenever, they would have taken it. They went with Motown because it was the only people that cared. No one else wanted them. Yeah. And to prove it, once Chameleon didn't happen, and the reason that it didn't happen is because Motown didn't care enough about it. All the things you guys are saying are true, stemming from the A&R department of Motown, who would have said, guys, this Chameleon album is going to be the next. What are you, crazy? They had the Four Seasons. If something happened, that would be great. The Four Seasons had anything happening on the charts for 4 years. And it was like, okay.
I think Gaudio stopped MoWest from putting anything else out, because the other stuff that was done with other producers was great stuff. You know, Hal Davis.
That was always Gaudio's priority. And the truth of the matter is that he would rather have 100% of whatever it is than 50% of a hit. And it's because he's succeeded that way.
So it's this 2023 now, and he's approved 13 tracks from this period.
Let me tell you something.
Most of which are his productions.
He's a gifted man, but the point is that when the whole season sound went away, if you take the track out of Who Loves You, just listen to the vocals.
Yeah,
it's Dawn. The voices are the same as far as Who Loves You. I know the voicing, so
but there was a blend to the voices then.
He was able to somehow, and not from any scripting or any plan, somehow, me and Jerry and Don and Joe and then eventually John, we didn't sound like the studio singers he was using on Hickory and all that.
Yeah,
we sounded like something, and honestly, some of that is great casting, but it wasn't casting. They were looking for younger, cheaper people to come and rebuild the brand. And fortunately, we sounded good. I mean, they knew we played good, but when you sing, you can have four guys who sing great and don't create, the Shy Lights.
Yeah.
Or the Platters, and not because they're doo-wop, but Dom knows that it's like the Osmonds. They're brothers. The Beach Boys. They're cousins. It's a different thing. And somehow these boys from Jersey fell together like the original guys, and we had that's luck.
Well, yeah, but in 1972, they were recorded with Hal Davis alongside the Jackson Five on the same sessions, and Jermaine Jackson and Michael Jackson. They were all in some of these productions, but none of them have seen the light of day. They've been suppressed for whatever reason, and we're only just getting a snapshot of those now.
Well, first of all, Kenny, the reason is that, number one, Gaudio is either not proud of them or embarrassed by them, one. Number two, sharing the wealth too much and not having the publishing. And number three, he doesn't need the money, so he'll do what he wants. And if he doesn't want it, then if he didn't have any money and needed a hit, he'd be giving all these unreleased things packaging, and you'd be a millionaire, Ken, because he'd be collaborating with you. He just doesn't need it. He don't need it. So
Well,
what
he
I'd say
signed
is
up.
the right way.
He signed up to this box set that's coming out in April or May, and he signed up to make it a fan design box set, and he knew it was going to be based around the Motown Unreleased. We actually know from an interview he did in 2002 that he was well aware of the Motown Unreleased. He talked to Harry Weinger about it. They talked about putting a project together. We put together a track listing and project in 2002 and again in 2006. He never bit then, and he made sure that we only got the anthology set of Inside You and Chameleon when they issued the Motown anthology in 2008. So, you know, there is a close down on this period, and we know why the close down was, because the important thing was to promote Who Loves You. But back in 72, they couldn't get a hit to save their lives. And then who comes back onto the scene? And I'm not sure whether it was who it was who pushed Bob Crew back to work with Bob Gaudio, but it certainly worked from one perspective, and that is that they started to write together, and we've heard the fruits of that in the new song that's coming out, Star, which is in the box set, and we also had How Come, which is there's a story behind How Come, and it's all related to how you came to be recruited, Lee, because the actual story is that Frankie Valli got so much internal conflict in the group by the beginning of 1973, and they weren't getting any releases and hits out of Motown, that he actually sacked the group at the Passaic Theatre in March. And obviously needed to replace or recruit other people. And we know that the first person he recruited was Jerry. So, Lee, can you take us into this period and talk about how the first seeds of the new Four Seasons came to be?
It's quite remarkable. People were advising me against going to the audition or doing anything with it because, number one, I was in Manhattan School of Music, and number two, what I kept hearing, there has been band music, doesn't sound like that anymore. And I knew in my heart, just from being a radio listener, that there were four entities that would not be like, with due respect to the Duprees and Salvato, and I'm friendly with them, but that would not sink off the tracks and dissipate into the ocean. And that would be the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Motown whole label sound, and Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. Those four entities dominated top 10 music to the point where I didn't believe they would go away for good. And I joined Frankie in the bottom of his career. But there were many aspects to it. Dimitri was recruited, still there. And just as a coincidence, he and I are born on the same day, June 7th. And he kind of took me under his wing. He was 12 years my senior and saw me through getting along with Joe Long and not getting along with Joe Long. Yeah. And then Frankie got cold feet and kept Clay Jordan in the band because he was afraid vocally that the guys didn't know the parts on them. And whatever he did work. I mean, there's five of us and Frankie, six people as Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons on the Sonny and Cher.
Well, you had to audition, didn't you? You had to.
Well, here's what happened. Here's what happened.
What did you sing? What did you play?
You're gonna like the story. I walk in and Frankie's not there, and Dimitri's there, and he made a very big presence, as you guys remember. Mm-hmm. And they had some of it I think I just did because I don't know, it was like blind faith. I could do this, and I had no idea what was going to be involved. And so I walked in, and there was a keyboard set up. I think it was a Farfisa organ, which was not really my instrument. I'm a pianist, but I can play it. And Jerry was there, and I said, and I look, a young guy, how cool. And we're born 2 days apart and a year, but nonetheless. So I'm figuring this is cool. Now it turns out Jerry likes Chicago. I like Chicago. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. We like cool jazz. We like, the big band sound. We had a lot in common. And the other guys were busting our balls most of the time. So not Dimitri, but Joe was tough. And Frankie was, when he walked out on stage in front of the whole orchestra and said, "Hey, Joe, Lee's going to conduct now. Okay, that's it." This is a man who was 20 years my senior, who was the only musician in the Four Seasons ever before me. And he just made me, he threw Joe under the bus and me with him afterwards, not realizing it. So Joe hated me from then on until I finally got him to see that we could make peace before his recent passing. But when I joined, Ken, you're quite correct as far as this whole new entity. But I was happy being a has-been, and I couldn't believe it. It had nothing to do with being one of the Four Seasons and famous and playing hit records. I had nothing to do. I was on the road. I was getting paid to be a musician. We were playing sold-out halls because of Frankie's name, and I never forgot. Probably the only season I never forgot that. But the bottom line is that I was 19. It was like, you got to be kidding. I'm playing. I played the Garden when I was 20. There's 20,000 people there. I have no idea what I sounded like. The monitor was like ear splitting this big, and the whole thing was an incredible experience. And then we went and we recorded Hickory, and we recorded those records. I won't get too far off
Well, the Hickory. One of the problems with you played Hickory live, but
well, I played the New Beginning live too.
Yeah.
Okay, so how come? Let's move back to how come.
Yeah, that was recorded by Crew.
Right. How come existed when I joined the band? And there's a famous story that no one knows. It's not epic, but it's a story. We're there with Frankie on stage at the Playboy Club in God, what was the name of the town? In Western New Jersey. And we're doing it for the first time. And none of us have done anything other than listen to a finished record and learn it. And we play it, and we finish in sound check. And Duke Natoli, who I still speak to, who is now pushing 89, and is our road manager and sax player, sweet man. He says out loud, I think it blurted, and he says out loud, comes out over the loudspeakers, "What's with this How Come song? It stinks." And Frankie spun around. Meanwhile, for what it was, "How come, baby?" It was, let's say it was great, which I don't think it was, but let's say it was. It wasn't a performance-oriented song.
No.
It didn't play well to people.
No.
Walk like a man. You can't sit still. Even Who Loves You and Oh What a Night, they are beat-driven. And even though the Four Seasons had beautiful vocals and were lush and different than everybody else and voiced cool, and the thing that drove it was the beat. And all of a sudden, there's no beat. It sounded like a commercial. It sounded like a commercial for Sunbeam Foods. And well done, beautiful.
I'm just trying to put the timeline in context with The Bachelor's 3.
Don did not play that.
Don was there, wasn't he?
No, I don't believe so.
His face is on the advertisement.
He wasn't there in 73.
74, maybe. 74.
74, yes. Yes,
June
in
74, yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So Don came on in early 74. Yeah.
Yes. And Frankie said to me in his own, Frankie said to me, "So Lee, we're getting a new guitar player who sings," and this is what he said. "He arranges, like he was like taunting me with my gig." So I've got to be very, needless to say, brothers with Ciccone. We were inseparable and wrote songs together. And I said to him in the car on the way home from Cherry Hill, the Latin Casino or something. I said, "So look, man, I pulled it out of nowhere. Look, man, I'm open to the fact that if you want to share the arranging or whatever Frankie had mentioned." He said, wait a minute. Because I don't want to do that. I just want to sing and play. And that was the end of it.
But before he joined, you'd gone in with Jerry, and you presumably met Nick Massey.
We worked with Mick Massey working out the vocals to
Kenny
the
Nolan.
Oh yeah, well, I've told you before with Kenny, that even gets ahead because that's Eyes Adore You. But the Hickory sessions that had charisma and all,
Yeah.
just some of the most horrendous songs. Problem with Hickory is that it was brandy. It doesn't work when you copy yourself. It works like a charm. When you copy someone else, it rarely works. If you look back, you know it's happened where people copied the Jacksons and it works, but it's not. There's no staying power to do that. And
Well, yeah.
so what it ended up doing is that with Hickory copying Brandy, the Four Seasons were known for hits that lasted, and Brandy was a one-hit wonder, and so it was the wrong one to follow. And Charisma was a waste of time, but nonetheless, Crew was back. Crew was back.
Crew was back. And what did you think of Hymn to Hair and Lovers, though? Those were
Fabulous.
songs.
Fabulous. I can still sing. I can still sing it. I'll never forget it. When I heard "When My Love Touches Me," I thought I was going to die. I said to Frankie, "You're back, man. This is it. This is it." And honestly, Eyes Adored You has that magic to it for Frankie, and that's why I understand them trying to do the split, and I understand why it didn't work, and all of that stuff. But the truth of the matter is that a Gaudio-driven Four Seasons would never have been what they are as we know them today. Yes. And a non-crew-driven Frankie Valli probably would have had big success, but it wouldn't have been like, Lennon and McCartney was like Crew, Colello, and Valli, and Gaudio too. But it couldn't help but make a hit. It just did. It kept erupting.
The end of the Motown.
Lee, can I take you back to Don Ciccone for a minute?
Sure.
Don came to the Four Seasons from the Critters. He originally had a hit record with Cap.
No. The Critters hit no. The Critters was 1966. He hadn't done anything in the industry at all since he was in college with Jimmy Ryan. There was nothing going on for him.
He was a part of the group that was with Enoch Light's Command and Project 3 records, which went nowhere. Did he bring any of that big band concept into the Seasons sound?
The big band influence came from four places. In 1967, Artie Schreck, but that was inspired. I choke when I say these things. It was Frankie Valli inspired. It really was. He loved that, and that's why he hit it off with me. I had a melodica I used to play in the car, and he'd say, "Lee, do you know all the things you are?" And I'd play it on the melodica, and he would say, listen to what he's doing. I want to do this song. And I would voice it out, and then Gaudio would say, "You can't do it." But be that as it may, Frankie was the impetus for the jazz influence of Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, and of Opus 17, and just not off the subject, but also Dawn was a ballad. Dawn was a folk ballad.
Yeah.
Go away, and this whole, that's Frankie. He wanted that from Prez Prado. So for a guy who knew nothing, he certainly was responsible for the stuff that made hits. So you can't discount, as quirky a guy as Frankie was, and of course I learned that in the first 6 months. What is with this guy? But I think I was resented for 3 reasons. I was Jewish, I was the youngest, and I was Frankie's favorite. I had no chance. I had no chance at all.
No chance with the rest then. Yeah. But you were, the point came where it became obvious to the powers that be in Bob, Gaudio, and Frankie that they had to leave Motown. I actually think the contract was running out by October 19th.
Wait, and they left just as 19-year-old Lee Shapiro's composition, I Wonder Why, was finished and accepted by Suzanne DePass.
Yeah.
And they left the label.
Exactly.
Now, I hate to think what might have happened to me if at 19, my first shot out, I pulled in the slot machine arm. If it had paid off into a big hit for Motown, I might be dead. We don't know.
Well, it's certainly going to be a hit in 2023 because it's going to get its first commercial release in the box.
I'm looking for my check as we speak.
Well, all you have to do is apply on a postcard to this address, Bob Gaudio, care of Frankie Valli.
Oh, that's great. You know, Lee Shapiro, care of Gaudio Valley Productions. You know how much of that I'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder why. We know the story. We've talked about that in the previous sessions. But yeah, I mean, it must have given you a degree of confidence that you and the guys could actually perform well in the recording studio. And
It was Dimitri. I credit Dimitri Kalas. I played and orchestrated that track.
Yeah.
As far as standing behind the board and making decisions as a producer, Dimitri did it. Dimitri.
Well, we've got him to thank for that.
I mean, I knew how to do it, but I'd never done it. And he walked in and basically took command. The beginning of it, I mean, there's like every 2 bars is another Four Seasons cliche. Like da 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 da. That whole thing is under my skin. The strings. Okay. Yeah. Da, da, da. So now we go into boom, 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 ragdoll, and then we go into Big Girls Don't Cry with the trumpet. Ba, 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 ba. That was intentional. Whatever worked for the Four Seasons, we built into this tune.
It was clips from previous songs joined together in a different way.
Listen to the drum part. I wonder why. Dum boom boom. And the dum boom boom is you're just too good to be true. Dum boom boom. Every piece of it is a lift. And
after you'd done that, and you know, you got no joy with that, and then Bob Crew pulled you guys into the studio to do the Hickory and Hymn to Hair and Lovers and that sort of stuff. After that, and the failure of Hickory, which only made 94 in the Billboard chart, it was clear that Gaudio and Valli wanted to leave Motown, even though Motown assembled an album of you know, unreleased stuff and hit stuff. So they were walking away from that, and Gaudio knew that he had the song Who Loves You, which he took, which was written on Jobette, because that's where he was still contracted, and along with a couple of other songs from which appear on the Who Loves You album. And so, as you say, he paid for the session for that to be recorded. Now we've got the session tape of you rehearsing that song and Don Ciccone doing the demo of it. And before that song, there's another one called We Had It All. And it's purely instrumental.
Honestly, We Had It All. Personally, I loved it.
It's only an instrumental track, We Had It All. Nobody knows what the lyrics are, but
I do.
The harmonies and the instrumentation are
I
fantastic.
know what it is. It's we had it all, walking in the sunshine, laughing in the rain. If I think about it long enough, I'll pull it out. But I remember it because I thought it was kind of cool. But for me, it was so early in my career with Frankie that to hear a real record. I mean, even I Wonder Why was recorded at 2 o'clock in the morning for free in a studio in Maryland. But like to walk in and like, this is a session. This is like happening, you know. And that song sounded like that, which is why I got in the industry long before I knew that a band session was different than a solo artist session and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the point is, that one sounded like a hit to me.
Yeah, it still sounds like a hit because of the strength of the instrumental parts and the strength of the harmonies.
Who wrote that? Is that a Gaudio song?
I don't know who wrote it. We haven't been able to find it anywhere. I can't find it on a BMI list.
You know what I'll do?
But you know, there's a strange thing. In the Motown archive, there's a listing of it from 1972, like it was written at the end of the Chameleon sessions and never recorded. Or if it was,
we record. I have to say that I think it was they were grabbing at straws, just like everybody who's hungry for the hit in the career they used to have, and that's kind of one of the sadnesses of our industry. Look, I never had a hit the size of any of the Seasons hit, but when I wrote Carrie,
you wrote Carrie, yeah,
with Don, and we heard it on the radio. I heard it on the radio. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm telling you honestly, I'm bearing my soul. I don't care that I was one of the Four Seasons. I thought I was going to cry. And then when Who Loves You was a hit, it was over. I mean, it was over. That's my arrangement.
Well, yeah. So at this point in time, when you were doing the demo and Don was singing it, Bob Gaudio must have thought these guys are hot, and they're doing my song, and they're going to make a hit out of it because it's so good. And obviously Mike Kerr liked it, and when Frankie heard it, he thought, my God, I've got to record this straight away. We've got to get it out.
If you take the more aggressive dance related rock attitude out of Who Loves You and just listen to the chords, then you'll be hearing Sherry.
Yeah.
And I don't blame Gaudio, because he went back to the form. What he did is he went back to the formula that worked when he was first having big hits, and then stuck a contemporary rhythm to it. I think it's brilliant. It makes a lot of sense. I've told you before, when things work with Gaudio, he said to me, I don't know what you did, but it works now.
You joined in to enjoy the ride rather than fall over the royalties. Yeah. Well, okay, that takes us to nicely to the point where we'll leave Motown behind, because Gaudio certainly did at that stage, and he left something like 40 tracks unreleased there, of which we're just getting 13 coming out in the box set, which we'll revisit when the box set comes out, and people can talk openly about what was done then. But to close matters down, I just want to, because it's been great to have you back, Lee, and to revisit all these times. So I just want to go around the guys and just ask them if they've got any questions for you specifically related to just what we've talked through, starting with you, Dominic.
Yeah, I think back in the 70s, with Motown, Michael Jackson was still hot. Diana Ross was still hot. You had the Beach Boys, which were producing hits. So Bob Gaudio had it coming with the Beatles, had it coming from all over. I mean, it was a really tough time to make hits, I think.
Sure, but the other Four Seasons, no one's like the Four Seasons, but the other ones that are of that ilk, you watch them fall away. Whether it was, even though there was a Brooklyn Bridge with Johnny Maestro, he had a hit or two and it fell away. And all of them fell away because of, the Beatles, and then when, Cream and Hendrix, and they were starting to get squished out.
Lee, you mentioned playing A New Beginning early on. And I know there are a few versions out there on YouTube. So I know they were still playing A New Beginning as late as 73. And that's pretty late back in terms of 70s standards, like 12 months from, a year was a long space of time in the 70s. When you joined, had they completely given up on Chameleon at that point? Was there anything else in the set that was from Chameleon? Did they talk about that album at all? Did they say, let's try The Night, let's try Touch the Rain Child, or was it just that song? Was it just A New Beginning?
We played The Night and we played A New Beginning. We played The Night because it was a hit in England, so it gave Frankie something to say. Here's a song that we're doing quite well with in London, and London, it was good fabric. Beware its promise. I hate it. I hate it now. I hated it then. But frankly, it's club appeal, and
Fantastic song.
the gay appeal and the club appeal.
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic. It is. It makes a lot of sense. It's like a Grace Jones record in its own way.
Yeah.
Hate it. But we used to play it, and A New Beginning. Both of those songs were played. I don't know whether they're on the recordings of it, because I haven't listened to all the recordings of it. But Bachelors 3 in 1973, I played The Night and I played A New Beginning. I also played I Got Love from Pearly with Frankie. I mean, he wasn't doing Marlena, but he's doing I Got Love from Pearly. I was a kid and I knew it. I
mean, you've got to remember the Four Seasons had become famous for doing things like Bridge Over Troubled Waters medley. They'd done it all the way through their 3 UK tours.
I did it with them as well. And then I wrote the arrangement of All in Love is Fair, and
All in Love is
and honestly, I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity. I'm glad I did it. But that was all Frankie's encouraging. He was saying, I love this song. I said, well, let's do it as a medley. I was saying it because I didn't want to have him out there doing My Love, the entire tune. and it has nothing to do with the Four Seasons. And so, but he was a proponent of the live show being bigger than a Four Seasons show. And now today it's a tribute to Jersey Boys. But to your question, yes, we played them, and it's really all there was. And I remember I had the single. Well, I am old. I had the single of the night on a record player with the disc behind the piano in my mother's living room. And I remember living there, getting ready to I'd gotten the job. I still lived with my mother when I was 19. And I would play it and then go to the piano, and then play it and then go to the piano and write my own little chart. Yeah. And I can see myself doing that now and then showing up and playing those songs. And as a matter of fact, Kenny, I don't know whether you know this, but I'm jumping around, but I still have the original rhythm chart that I wrote out for I Wonder Why.
I think you've I
might have posted it for
you. Of it on Facebook.
Maybe so, yeah, maybe so. Bottom line is that those days in the very beginning, all there was the stuff from Chameleon and Frankie's show tunes and the original hits. And I was respectfully perfectly happy to not deal with Chameleon. Number one, I had nothing to do with it, so that's a bit of a impetus for me to want to move forward. Yeah. And number two, I thought it wasn't good. I may be in the minority, but
yeah. I mean, the thing is, what the fans remember is what's good. That's the way we are.
Well, I honestly, part of the reason I fit with the Seasons, even though I was very Charlie Colello-ish in my mind and big bandy in my head, but what made it fit was that I liked hits. I liked what you could sing, and they could. I don't know how, but they could sense that about me, because when I arranged, I put the part back that they had cut out. I've told the story about Dawn. I kept putting those parts back because they sounded like a hit, and I think audio recognized it and ended up being able to have a rapport.
So let's go to Chuck and see
Chuck.
What you said.
Yeah, Leah, you commented earlier that there was from what I heard, a distinct difference between recording in the studio for a record or coming up with a concept for live performances. It would seem to me that you had to have a hit record so you could use that for the live performances, but there's a lot of the records that they've had that were hits that they don't have the capability of doing live because of the way they're mixed. Can you comment on that?
Well, that's no longer the case, because with digital tracks and playing along and sampling and triggering vocals to make the vocals fatter, I will tell you that one of my earliest lessons was from Colello, who put his arm around me and said, just remember, Lee, when you're writing live, you could write big chords. When you're writing for the studio, write unison. And I said, why? And he said, because it'll muddy things up with big chords. But if you suggest them, unison, two parts, he says, it becomes another hook. And if you listen to Oh, What a Night, under the bridge, ba, 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 da, 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 it's all unison. And it's a part that people remember. So today, I in my head, I know that Swearing to God had big fat horns. There's always the exception to the rule. But listen to Opus 17. All unison. It works. But Charlie wasn't talking about, and I'm not even talking about a rule. Do this here, do that there. I'm telling you that this works when you do it here, and this works when you do it there. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't.
But I mean, songs like "Oh What a Night" seem to work almost exactly live as they do on record. Is that the case?
And I attribute that to two people, Ciccone and Pulci. Now, I arrange a thing with Gaudio, but I'm here to be honest with you, because that's the fun of this, and it is that they never had a drummer like Pulci before, and the fact that he could sing was nurtured by Gaudio. He nurtured that sound. Pulci didn't sound like that when he was singing background parts originally. That whole sweet thing was Gaudio drawing it out of him. And Ciccone, when he moved from guitar to bass, He was Joe played bass like a jazz bass player, which can be very good. He wasn't, because he had to play as a righty, which is sad. But and I admire him for having done that. But Ciccone played with a pick, and he played like a guitar player. So you get all that that stuff would be what wasn't in a live performance, but Ciccone did it, so it was there.
Yeah.
You know, just like in the early days, they did, you know, when 1963 or 4, you know, they would do the 4 of them with Gaudio on Farfisa, and it was, you know, it's a different era, completely different. It's like history, archives. But they still did Big Girls Don't Cry without the trumpets.
Yeah.
They still, what could they have possibly sounded like with 3 guys, 2 of them couldn't sing a note? And
Well, I don't know if you've heard the recent recording we found from 1964, which Bobby Valli posted a couple of weeks ago, and it's Candy Girl recorded on a cassette recorder. The only thing that's so noticeable about it is just how fantastic Frankie Valli's vocal is.
Well, Frankie couldn't help but be great. Later on was another issue, but no, in the day, in the real day,
But,
he couldn't help but be great. But the background singers were from the era. They were from the era of doo-wop. So if they did something that was ragged and then they had another track to double it, it became real fat. Now it's better if you sing both tracks in tune, but if they're a little out of tune, they get huge, and that was what the Four Seasons was all about. The doubling and tripling. So much so that when they would record Sherry or any of those things in 3-track or 2-track, it got degraded to the point where you couldn't hear the bass drum at all. So that's another reason why things like Tambourine are always so loud on those records, because they're the last thing to go on, so they have the best signal. But if you ever heard those songs being made in that format, you would hear bass drum and lead vocals so excruciating that you just can't believe it'll ever be a record. And then they mix it down from there, and then it gets absorbed. And then on the radio, in AM radio, it gets compressed over the array. And it's almost like you can never, back in the day, you could never get it to sound like that cool thing, whatever was happening on the radio. Number one, it was compressed, and number two, it was sped up like 1%.
Well,
so they could have more ad time.
I want to talk to you in the next session about
Okay.
a recording of Who Loves You and the successive releases of the songs from then on to through into your success. Okay, guys. Okay, well,
Thank you all.
A
lot of fun. Be well.
Say hi to Connie Stevens for us.
I will. Yeah, she's in the main room.
And good luck with your forthcoming performances, Dominic.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, guys, and I'll get this out in the next week or two. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Be well, everyone. Be well.
All the best.
Cheers now.